We are getting finally a few policy positions articulated on the official Harris campaign website. And Douglas, she wants to provide a pathway to citizenship for migrants who have crossed over the border illegally. This is in stark contrast to Donald Trump, whose policy is to enact a massive deportation initiative to get rid of illegal immigrants from the country. How do you think this is going to play out?
This has played out so many times in America in recent decades. When you have a completely porous border, there is always this temptation for people to say, why don't we put a pathway to citizenship for people who are in America already? And instead of having them work in the shadow economy, in the black market, and so on, let's bring them in, make them taxpayers, make them citizens, and so on. In one way, this is a perfectly reasonable argument. On the other hand, it's absolutely lethal, because what it does is, after the millions of people who've already broken into America through the southern border illegally, it simply encourages more to come. Why? Because it says, you just got to get in, you'll get everything that you need, and you'll eventually be actually a citizen. In other words, the crime of breaking into the country illegally will effectively not be judged to be a crime, and there won't be any punishment for it. The problem about this is, and it's the same problem that Europe has been going through, it's the same problem Britain's going through, it's the same problem that Australia has been challenged by in the past, as you know, although Australia has been one of the relatively sane countries on this. The problem with it is not the people who have already come. It's the millions upon millions of people who would like to come, and who, the minute that you make that pathway from being an illegal who breaks in to being a citizen, the minute you make that pathway that easy, it's just millions upon millions of people who will want to follow in the footsteps of those people. So it's always there, this idea, the pathway to citizenship, it's always there as a temptation for politicians, but they leave for their successors a bigger and bigger nightmare.
Absolutely. You're just creating more pull factors. You're putting more sugar on the table, as they say. And I do wonder whether Democrats would be so keen on this path to citizenship if they weren't counting on these new citizens voting for them. Perhaps they're miscalculating there, but I think in the past they've been fairly safe in thinking these new migrants who've been effectively awarded for crossing the border illegally will support us with their vote. Now, illegal immigrants are causing all sorts of serious issues for people across many towns in the US. It's not just those border towns anymore. We've had armed Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment buildings in Colorado, to thousands of immigrants from Haiti being placed in a little town called Springfield, Ohio. This is a town with a population of less than 60,000, Douglas. And the mayor there says they've been overwhelmed by 14 to 20,000 migrants that have been brought in by authorities. The locals have had enough.
I really challenge you guys to get out here and do something. These Haitians are running into trash cans. They're running into buildings. They're running into... they flipping cars in the middle of the street.
Douglas, the locals there are not getting to the services they need because they're being overwhelmed by these new migrants that have arrived. And when you think about the numbers, a town of less than 60,000 to suddenly have anywhere between 14 and 20,000 new people placed in it, you can understand why they're overwhelmed.
I mean, I've seen this so many times in so many other Western countries, Rita. It's exactly the sort of thing that happened in Sweden since 2015. It's exactly the same thing that's happened in towns in Germany and elsewhere. And it's always the same story, is that the locals say, we can't put up with this. And central or local government says, tough luck. You're going to have to. And I think this is profoundly immoral on the part of politicians. I think it's a wicked thing to do. The first duty of politicians is to look after the interests of the people who put them in power, the voters. It's not to make sure that everyone in Venezuela who wants to flee and break into a condo flat gets the right to do so. And I think it's an unbelievable offering up of responsibility, abdication of responsibility by politicians. And as I said earlier, they leave a much bigger mess for the people coming after them.
Absolutely. Now let's move to the UK. The BBC's Israel Hamas coverage is said to have breached the broadcaster's own editorial guidelines over 1,500 times. This is according to a new report compiled by a team of lawyers and data scientists. Douglas, they analysed some 9 million words of coverage across several languages and different platforms. The question has to be asked, why does the BBC have this deeply worrying pattern of bias against Israel?
It always has done. I'm slightly surprised that they've been found to have only 1,500 breaches of their own guidelines in recent months. I'd have put the figure rather higher than that. There was a report some years ago into the BBC's anti-Israel bias inside the BBC, and the report was never released. And I suspect, as many other people do, that it's because it came to the same conclusions that this report has come to. You can absolutely smell it in Broadcasting House. There's a straightforward editorial line on the Israel issue, which is that the BBC believes that Israel always is in the wrong and can do no right. And its coverage is grossly unfair. It has been for years. And I think this is something that should be addressed. I mean, you see it in headline after headline, day after day. The BBC will report things from effectively the angle of Hamas. It happened recently with the issue of the four hostages who were killed in captivity. The way in which the BBC reported this, it was as if the Israelis had killed the Israeli hostages. It was as if the Israeli Prime Minister had killed the Israeli hostages. The whole onus of the coverage was as if there was an Israeli mistake or error or Israeli intransigence that had caused it. And the coverage did not acknowledge the fact that in most civilized media entities, as well as societies, it is deemed to be wrong to break into somebody else's country, break into their house, kill their citizens and kidnap them, then hold them in tunnels for almost a year and then shoot them in the head. Most people would regard that as being on the people who did it. But oh, not the BBC, because you can always find Jeremy Bowen or another of their correspondents always taking the side, always of just anyone who's anti-Israel. It's an endemic bias in the BBC. It's completely sick. And of course, they're welcome to do that. If they want to just be a pro-Hamas, anti-Israel channel, they can do that. But there's a caveat with them, which is that they're not in the free market. They're not in exchange of free ideas. They're paid for by the license payers, by the taxpayers in the UK. So that's why this matters. It's not like The Guardian. The Guardian can do what it wants. This is the national broadcaster. And so I think that a better standard should be expected of them and indeed demanded.